I used to tell people that my superpower was steadiness. I'm the guy who remembers to bring the Advil on hikes, the one who sets the timers at Thanksgiving so nobody burns the rolls, the one who parks on the far side of the lot so there's room for everyone else. I'm not flashy, I don't make grand declarations. I stock the fridge, set the coffee maker the night before, and text my mother every Sunday at 9. For most of my 30s, that felt like enough. If love is a bridge, someone has to be the support beams. My name's Daniel Mercer. I'm 35 and a physical therapist in Seattle. My clinic sits a block off Broadway on Capitol Hill, wedged between a ramen place with a line out the door and a florist who keeps buckets of ranunculus on the sidewalk even when it rains. The clinic smells like eucalyptus and rubber bands. Patients come in with pain and leave with homework. I don't heal anyone. I give them charts and consistency, and if they trust that, their bodies do the rest. I met Julia on a Tuesday that wanted to be Friday. The rain had finally lifted after a week of endless gray, and I walked home the long way past Cal Anderson Park, cutting through a pop-up market where everyone was peddling something you could hang on a wall and call a conversation. She stood behind a table of prints, bold colors, black outlines like stained glass, and argued with a stranger about whether pigeons were ugly or misunderstood. She had a crooked smile and a chipped tooth that made her look like she just dared the world to say something about it. "Pigeons are just city hawks wearing worse outfits," she told the man, and then saw me hovering and added, "Right?" "Absolutely," I said, because sometimes the correct answer is the one that brings you closer to the person talking. I bought a print of 3 bicycles stacked like totems. She wrapped it in butcher paper and wrote Julia in big block letters on the tape because she was out of stickers, and said she wanted me to remember who to Venmo if I decided not to hang it after all. I told her I would definitely hang it. I hung it that night. It's still above my dining table, the only splash of noise in an apartment that leans toward beige. We started with copy that turned into a walk, that turned into tacos, that turned into me, making excuses to cross the city just to be near her. She lived in Fremont over a laundromat, the kind of place where you have to jiggle the door and talk to the radiator to get heat in January. She painted at a shared studio near Gasworks Park, worked weekends at the market, and when she was broke, she took gig shifts for a vegan bakery that specialized in cakes shaped like things they had no business being. Succulent gardens, game controllers, the Space Needle. Julia came from noise. 4 siblings, a father who taught high school band, a mother who ran an after-school program out of their living room in Tacoma. She spoke like she'd been cut off her whole life and learned to finish her sentences anyway. She played music while she cooked. She collected postcards from places she hadn't been. She referred to the moon like it was an old friend she kept meaning to text back. The first time I met Ethan, he was in her kitchen, barefoot, turning a lemon with a microplane like he'd invented citrus. He was her best friend from college, the kind of man who managed to look both disheveled and curated, expensive flannel, hair that took more time than he'd admit, a tattoo of tiny mountains that disappeared under his sleeve. He worked as a producer for a podcast you've heard of, or at least that's what he said. He knew the good bars and the back entrances to festivals and the names of baristas like he'd memorized a cast list. "Daniel," he said, taking my handshake like he was accepting an award, "the man who makes glutes behave." "I'm not a dog trainer," I said, and he laughed like I'd passed a test. In the beginning, I liked him, or maybe I liked that Julia liked him and that he liked me enough to make space. He asked about my patients. He told stories. He stayed after dinner to do the dishes, singing badly to 90s hits in a voice that could almost make you forgive him for hitting the wrong notes. I've never been the guy who says, "I don't trust her male friends. It sounds like you're trying to control the weather." I told myself Julia and I were a team, and teams don't keep score against their own. If I'm honest, the first hairline crack looked small. We were at a gallery opening where everything on the walls looked like a fortune cookie if the cookie had feelings. Julia had a piece-bright orange arcs that made you think of traffic cones and sunsets at once, and people were actually paying attention. I stood with her while she talked about gesture and the way color interrupts a room, and nodded dutifully because I wanted to support her even if I didn't speak the language. Ethan arrived late, swept in with 2 friends, and a story about a busker who had started rapping at a stoplight. Within minutes, he was telling a joke near a cluster of people, and Julia had drifted toward the laughter. I stayed where I was, pouring cups of boxed wine and explaining to a woman in a beret that, no, I wasn't the artist, I was the coat rack. It felt stupid to feel stupid, but I did. He was always there, that was the thing. Not in a mashed up boundary way, exactly. He wasn't sleeping on her couch or calling at midnight just to talk. He just appeared. Trivia nights, flea markets, a late show at the Neptune he accidentally had extra tickets for. He knew the staff at her studio and the names of the baristas at Milstead and the best pork buns within a 10-block radius. And Julia laughed with him, really laughed the way a person does when they recognize their dialect. I told myself not to be petty. I told myself she'd chosen me. We moved slowly and then all at once. She started leaving paint-stained sweatshirts at my place. I cleared a shelf for her tea. We made an adult decision about a cat because my building allowed pets under 20 pounds and a woman on Facebook was trying to rehome a skittish tortoiseshell. Julia named her Disco because she's afraid of joy. The cat preferred Julia and a particular spot under my couch. When Julia wasn't there, Disco would creep onto my lap like a forgiveness I didn't deserve. I was good at being steady for us, I think. I fixed the leaky sink. I documented our budget so we could aim, vaguely, at someday. I bought little things that made her life smoother, better clamps for stretching her canvases, a space heater for the studio that smelled like burned toast but kept her fingers from stiffening in January. She made my apartment look like someone lived there who read books without pictures. She pinned postcards to a corkboard, Marfa, Reykjavik, Sedona, Lima, places we might go when we were less, ourselves. When the crack widened, it did it quietly. We had a Thursday ritual. I finished late at the clinic. She grabbed groceries at Trader Joe's, and we met at my place to make something ambitious we'd both regret halfway through. That night's mistake was mushroom risotto. The speakers played Fleet Foxes. Disco stared at us like cats stare when they judge you for using garlic powder from a jar. Julia put her phone on the counter, face down, and I had the small, childish thought, leave it like that all night, please. Just once. It buzzed. Buzzed again. She flipped it over and hit speaker because her hands were covered in onion, and Ethan's voice leaped into the room, big and easy like a guy who never had to whisper. "Okay, crisis," he said. "Do either of you have olive oil? The good kind. I just realized mine is basically motor oil, and I promised to make this stupid focaccia for the team thing tomorrow, and I have 3 hours to age 10 years. You're such a drama queen," Julia laughed. "We have oil. We're oil rich." "Can I come pillage?" he asked. "Of course," she said, and glanced at me with the face she used when she was being generous. "Let the world in. It costs us nothing." I swallowed the small no in my throat and said, "Sure, because what kind of monster denies someone olive oil?" 10 minutes later, he was at the door, hair damp from rain, smelling like laundry detergent that cost more than mine. He told a big story about a guy at PCC who'd cut in front of him in line by pretending not to understand how lines worked and took a bow when he made Julia snort laugh. "Stay for a minute," she said when he reached for the bottle. "We're making risotto." He stayed an hour. He grated Parmesan like a man shredding evidence and told us about his boss, who apparently speaks entirely in metaphors, and his neighbor, who allegedly plays the oboe at midnight, and the episode they were producing that week about the moral panic over e-bikes. He and Julia talked in loops, sentence fragments that referred to other fragments, and I kept simmering and stirring, thinking if the rice gets creamy enough, I will feel something like belonging. When he finally left, he kissed Julia's cheek, called me chief, and said he'd bring the bottle back tomorrow. He did not. I don't know if you've ever been in a room where two people speak a dialect you almost understand. It makes you a translator, and translators get tired. I started noticing things I wish I hadn't. The way Julia texted him during movies, the way she said "we" about plans that didn't include me, the way she rolled her eyes when I asked if Saturday's gallery thing was a long one. I didn't want to turn into a man who kept score. I made lists instead, pros and cons, chores and costs, what we had, what we wanted. Lists felt cleaner than feelings. Julia said, lists turned everything into homework. I said homework gets you where you want to go. The night I heard the laughter, it was an ordinary Tuesday with a bruise in it. I'd stayed late at the clinic because an old man named Lewis who'd fallen off a ladder needed me to watch his gait so he wouldn't do something stupid with his hip. I loved Lewis. He smelled like cedar and told jokes that had been old in the 70s and wore a flat cap even on the treadmill. He laughed and told me I was too serious and demanded I take a mango from his bag because you look like you don't eat fruit. I got home after 9, hungry and pleased with myself for doing good work in the world. The apartment was warm. Julia had been painting, the air thick with turpentine, brushes soaking in a line of mugs that used to hold tea. Disco sat in the windowsill, tracking a moth like it owed her money. Julia was in the bedroom, phone on speaker. I heard Ethan's voice before I heard hers, and I paused in the hallway like you do when a street musician is good and you don't want to interrupt whatever magic is happening for people who were there first. I'm serious, he was saying. You can't keep shrinking to fit the life he wants. You bring this up every time I talk about him, Julia laughed, but the laugh sounded tired. Because you keep doing it, he said. Since when do you eat dinner at 6 and go to bed at 10 and spend Saturdays in a grocery store comparing the sodium on soup cans? That happened one time, she said. You said it like a cute story, he said, and I heard it like a eulogy. Ethan, I'm not the enemy, he said. I just remember you before the lists. He's not all lists, she said softly. He's safe. Safe is a word you use for a neighborhood, not a boyfriend, Ethan said. You deserve to be lit up. You used to be lit up. Silence. The quiet where someone tells the truth to a wall and waits for it to answer. I should have cleared my throat. I should have rattled a hanger. Instead, I stood there and held my breath like a kid under a table, and the universe punished me by giving me what I asked for. Ethan said, also, I'm going to be the bad guy and say the thing everyone else is too polite to say. Don't, Julia warned. If he makes you feel like you have to debrief after, you know. He paused. If it feels like practice instead of play, that's not you being immature. That's him being, I don't know, clinical. Julia made a sound like a laugh shadow. It's fine, she said, stretching the word until it sounded like it might snap. Fine is beige, Ethan said. Fine is lukewarm tea. Fine is... She cut him off, but she was laughing. Not belly laugh, not delight. The laugh you use when you don't know which side of a fence you're on, and mockery feels safer than grief. I stood there with my jacket still on and my keys in my hand and felt my stomach go cold. I don't think I'm thin-skinned. My job strips you of vanity fast. You can't be precious about bodies when you spend your days telling people how to breathe while they squat. But the idea that my girlfriend discussed me like a Yelp review with someone who wasn't me, who didn't even want me to win, made something messy in me stand up and roar. I walked into the bedroom and said, "Hey," and Julia jerked like she'd caught her hand in a drawer. She flipped the phone, turned off speaker, murmured something I couldn't hear, and ended the call. "You're home," she said, like the most obvious sentence in the world. "How was Louis?" "Louis is going to outlive us all," I said. "How was Beige?" Her face changed. People talk about faces hardening like clay. Hers didn't. It blurred. You heard that. I did. I did not mention I had stood there longer than a good man should and listened to my own life get resized. She didn't apologize. That would have been too clean. She did the thing that lives in the gray area between apology and explanation. "We were talking about habits," she said. "He pushes, Daniel. He says things bigger than they are. It's a bit to talk about me like a spreadsheet." My voice sounded like a stranger's, flat and sharp at once. We were joking. She stepped toward me. "I'm sorry you heard it. I wouldn't have said it if I knew." "That's worse," I said, and immediately hated how petty it sounded, but I couldn't put it back in the drawer. A fight didn't happen. We aren't that kind of couple. We have what I used to call adult conversations. Calm, reasonable, devastating. She said she felt judged by the way I organize our life like a project. I said I felt judged by the way she brings other people into our life like it's a potluck, and I'm supposed to be grateful for whatever shows up. She said Ethan makes her feel seen. I said if she needs him to see her, what exactly do my eyes do all day? She said I was turning one overheard conversation into a thesis. I said it wasn't one conversation, it was the feeling of being narrated by someone who doesn't live here. She said she was tired. I said me too. We did that for a week, quiet politeness and tiny punishments. I worked later than I had to. She slept at her apartment to finish a piece, which might have been true. Disco chose no sides and hid. Ethan's name sat between us like a lemon nobody wanted to cut. I told Rosa, my colleague at the clinic, because she's the person who tells me when I am lying to myself. She listens like a therapist and then swears like a line cook when she's done. She said, "You're allowed to be hurt. You're also allowed to be wrong. Which one feels more true?" "Hurt," I said, "and also probably wrong." "So you're human," she said. "Cool. You get to choose what to do with it." She tapped a pen on the counter. "What does choosing look like if you're not trying to win?" I said I didn't know. Winning had always looked like not losing. The thing you need to know about me is that when I feel powerless, I grab for evidence. I don't scream. I research. I don't stalk. I collect. It's a bad habit when applied to people who are not problems to be solved. One night, I got home early, and Julia was still at her studio, and I told myself I was going to make dinner and listen to jazz like a grown man with boundaries. Her laptop sat open on the table, the screen asleep, the little white light pulsing like a heartbeat. I touched the trackpad because I'm a monster and also because the light annoyed me. The messages were right there. I didn't have to click. They were already open, a column of blue and gray bubbles like a beach of polished stones. Ethan, are you alive? You disappeared into Beige Man's schedule. Julia, stop calling him that. Ethan, I will when he stops being that. He had also sent a photo of a sandwich with a huge bite taken out of it, and the caption, I am devouring life on your behalf. It was obviously a bit. It felt like a threat anyway. Further up, there were jokes about my socks, complaints about my alarms, a video of a band she loved that I had said sounded like a smoke detector that learned chords, a screenshot of my shared grocery list with my little checkboxes, which he had defaced with emoji trophies, and the caption, he's gamifying produce. It was humiliating in a way that doesn't leave marks. And there were the lines from the night I overheard, him prodding, her laughing, and the part that made my ears go hot, her saying, it's not that he's bad, it's that he's bad, it's that he won't let himself be good. Like he's allergic to messy. I closed the laptop like I'd found a fire and didn't know how to put it out. The next day, I asked Julia to meet me at Volunteer Park. It's a place you go to make big conversations look like a picnic. We sat near the conservatory and watched a toddler chase a crow while his father pretended not to panic. I said, I'm trying not to keep score, but I feel like I'm bleeding points. She said she didn't want to feel like a defendant in a trial. I said I didn't want to be a judge. She said Ethan was a constant before me, and constants don't get erased just because new equations appear. I said if the constant makes the equation unsolvable, maybe you change the problem. She laughed without humor and said, we're not math. I told her I wanted one thing, that our relationship be a place with walls. Not a fortress, not barbed wire, not a bunker, just walls. We can let people in, I said, but we decide who and when and how much. She said that sounded like control. I said it sounded like respect. We sat inside that stalemate until the toddler fell down and the crow flew off and the sky decided to spit rain on our indecision. What happened next felt, at the time, like the universe adding a neon arrow. Julia's sister, Leah, came to town. Leah is 3 years older, a high school counselor in Tacoma, the kind of person who can ask you 3 questions and crack you open like a geode. She visited on a Saturday and insisted we go to Alki for clam chowder, even though it was windy enough to flip umbrellas inside out. We walked the path by the water and pretended not to shiver. Leah asked about my work. Leah asked about Julia's upcoming show. Leah asked about Ethan. He's family, Julia said before Leah had even finished the question, and Leah hummed in a way I couldn't read. We ended up back at my place because it was closest, and because Julia wanted to show her the bicycle's print that had started it all. Julia went to the bathroom. Leah looked at me over the rim of her mug and said, "Are you okay?" People ask that like they want you to say yes. Leah asked it like she would actually accept no. I said, "I'm trying to be." She nodded like I had revealed a secret and said nothing else, which made me like her more than I expected. When Julia came back, Leah told a story about a kid at her school whose mother insists on calling the principal twice a week to tell him how to do his job. "There's love," Leah said, "and then there's narrating." She looked at Julia when she said it, then at me, and the air in the room changed like when someone opens a window you didn't realize was painted shut. Later, after Leah left, I said, "Does your sister think I'm narrating you?" Julia said, "I think my sister thinks I narrate myself into corners." Then she said quieter, "She doesn't like being told what to do." I said, "Me either." We had a decent week, the kind where nothing breaks and you mistake that for repair. I told myself the problem was shrinking in the rear view. I told myself we were choosing each other with small choices, the way she texted me her lunch, the way I stopped preloading the dishwasher during dinner so she didn't feel like I was timing her bites. I even said something nice about Ethan when he landed a guest he'd been chasing for months. That was hard to do. "You're persistent." I thought generosity might starve my resentment. It didn't, but it looked good on us for a minute. Then came the rooftop. Ethan texted Julia a photo of the skyline from the Smith Tower with the caption, "Look where my life brought me." Julia showed me and said, "He got us on the list. The bar's open until 11. We could go after your last client." She said it like an invitation and a test. I said yes because I didn't want to be the man who said no. The elevator creaked us up to a room full of red leather and old wood and people who tell stories loudly so the room will agree they're interesting. The city unfurled outside like a map. Julia took photos of the Ferris wheel and the ferries. Ethan appeared with a flourish, hugs, and cocktails, and the kind of charm that makes you wonder if you're stingy for not liking it. He toasted to art and bodies that heal, which felt like a nice thought until I realized he meant us as categories, not as people. We found a corner. He asked Julia to dance to a song that wasn't for dancing, and she said yes because saying yes is one of her powers. I watched from the table, finishing my club soda, feeling very adult and very ancient. When they came back, flushed, he put a hand on her shoulder when he laughed. I noticed the hand because that's what men do when they are trying not to notice hands. It looked like nothing. Maybe it was nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. It didn't feel like nothing. They talked about a show in Georgetown that weekend with installations and old airplane hangars. I said I'd be there. Ethan said the ticket page might be sold out, but he could work his magic. I said buying tickets is not magic, it's a website. He grinned and said, not for everyone, and I smiled like a person who has not yet swallowed a wolf. On the way down in the elevator, Julia pressed close and said, "You were good tonight." Like a boy at a dentist, I said. Like a man who trusts me, she said. It should have landed like a kiss. It landed like homework. The next morning, I found a sticker on my mailbox. Hello, I'm doing my best. I didn't put it there. Julia said she did. It made me think of you, she said, and I couldn't tell if that was a compliment or a diagnosis. I wish this story had a single, glorious explosion where everything becomes undeniable. It didn't. It had attrition. It had the way she stopped telling me small things because she didn't want advice, and the way I started giving advice to an empty room and calling it thinking. It had Ethan's name lighting up her phone and me staring at it like it was writing my future in Morse code. It had the slow recognition that I hated someone I had no right to hate, that I wanted something from her I didn't know how to name, that I could not be both the soft place to land and the whiteboard where we strategize landing. There was, eventually, a final scene. It is not the end of our story, but it is the end of my version. It happened in late spring when the rhododendrons made every street look like it had been assigned a color. Julia had a show in a small gallery in Pioneer Square. Ethan was there, of course, wearing a shirt with tiny sailboats and a grin like he had decided to be the protagonist. The room buzzed. People said big words and laughed politely. I stood by the refreshments table like a bouncer guarding hummus. A woman asked Julia about one of her pieces, a series of squares that looked like windows at different times of day. Julia said something about thresholds. Ethan said something about liminal spaces. I said something about frames being heavier than you think, which was true and also not relevant. The woman nodded at Ethan and wrote a number in a little notebook and walked away. Julia took my hand. "Let's get air," she said, and we stepped onto the street where a busker was playing a violin like it owed him money. She looked at me and said, without cruelty, "You look like you're trying not to breathe." "I'm trying to get this right," I said, "to be what you need." "I don't need you to be something," she said. "I need you to be you, but I also need room to be me." "I'm giving you room," I said. "I'm building room." "You're building walls," she said. "I'm building us," I said, hearing how ridiculous I sounded and unable to stop. "I don't want to have to leave the room to hear my own thoughts," she said, and it landed like a light bulb shattering quietly. "I'm not Ethan," I said stupidly. She smiled without joy. "I know," she said. "That's the point." We stood in the spring light and didn't touch. A couple walking a corgi asked us to take their photo, and we did. And when we handed the phone back, the woman said, "You two are cute." And we both said thank you in the same voice people use when they apologize for blocking the aisle at the grocery store. Back inside, I found Ethan at the back near the bathroom door. I told him I wanted him to back off. He looked at me like I'd asked him to stop being 5'8". He said he'd known her longer than I had. I said longevity isn't a virtue on its own. There are people who've had back pain longer than their marriages. He laughed and said, "You're great at metaphors, Doc." I said if he called me Doc again, I would use my training for evil. He grinned and said, "There he is. There's some fire." Julia walked up then, and the three of us stood in a triangle that felt very old. She said, "Please don't do this here." I said, "I'm asking for what I need." Ethan said, "He's asking for a leash." She flinched, and he saw it, and for a second I hated him for being able to hurt her at all. I left. It felt like the only way to not become the kind of man who says things he can't unsay. I walked to the ferry terminal and watched a boat leave without me. I thought that was poetic, and I hated myself for thinking in metaphors when real life was breaking. For the next 2 days, we didn't speak. Then I asked her to meet me at the little cafe near my clinic, the one with the ceramic goat in the window. She arrived in paint-stained jeans and a sweatshirt with a hole in the cuff and looked like a person I had loved across 1,000 small mornings. "I can't keep doing this," I said before hello. "I can't be measured against someone who isn't in the relationship." "I'm not measuring," she said. "I'm trying not to disappear." "So am I said, and I meant it more than I knew before I said it. She looked at her hands. "I don't think we make each other bigger," she said. "I think we make each other neat." She didn't say it like an insult. She said it like a diagnosis that comes with a treatment plan neither of us wants. I said the thing that felt like jumping off a roof in the dark and hoping the ground is closer than it looks. "Maybe we're wrong for each other." Julia nodded slowly, like her neck hurt. "I've been afraid to say that," she said, "because wrong sounds like failure, and you are not a failure. You're good." "You too," I said, and we both laughed because we were complimenting each other like two HR reps exiting an exit interview. We didn't break up then. I wish we had. It would make for a cleaner story. We made a plan, 2 weeks apart, no rules about what came after. We hugged on the sidewalk, and I went back to the clinic and taught a 19-year-old how to hip hinge without rounding his back, and told a 60-year-old she was stronger than she felt, and tried not to cry in the supply closet. In those 2 weeks, I pretended to be the man I am when I'm not in love. I cleaned my apartment until it looked like a rental listing. I ran around Green Lake at sunrise with old men who looked like they'd been outrunning grief for 20 years. I visited my mother in Shoreline and fixed a cabinet door that has been squeaking since my father left when I was 13. She fed me halibut and told me nothing I didn't already know, which is sometimes the best gift. On day 12, Julia texted, "Can you meet me at Gasworks at 6?" I said yes without making her ask twice. We sat on the hill where everyone takes the same photo of the skyline. Kite strings hummed. A girl in a prom dress tried to keep her heels from sinking into the grass while her boyfriend fussed with a boutonniere. The world kept insisting on being itself. Julia said, "I didn't see Ethan this week." I said, "I didn't ask." She said, "I'm telling you anyway." We talked like people who were trying to put a puzzle back in the box. She said she missed me. I said I missed the version of me. I am with her when we get it right. She said she didn't know how to make herself smaller. I said I didn't know how to stop trying to keep us organized. She said maybe we weren't broken, we were just misfit. I said misfit sounds like a store that sells discount shirts. She laughed, and we looked at each other like, "You'll get the last slice of something you both want but don't want to argue about?" When the light faded, she said, "I think I need to be alone." The words were simple and heavy. I thought of all the ways I could argue them into something softer. I didn't. I said, "Okay," and stood up so I wouldn't cry sitting down. We hugged for a long time, longer than you should when you already know goodbye is the only thing left to say. She whispered that I had been steady, that she needed that once, but now she needed something else. I told her I hoped she'd find it, and then I let go. I walked back to my apartment through the soft Seattle drizzle, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath. Steadiness might not have been enough for Julia, but it's still mine. And someday, it'll be exactly what someone is looking for. That's my story, my truth. And maybe the lesson is simple. Sometimes love fails not because someone is cruel, but because two people don't fit the way they thought they would. What do you think about this story? Was I too blind, or was Julia already halfway gone before the end? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed listening, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you won't miss the next story.